Hey guys, so today you and I are going to talk about interviews. So let's get into it. So the question in question is, hi Frederick, what are the differences between questions asked on LeetCode and similar platforms and those asked in an actual interview? Well, depends on the interview, and I would say that in some cases it might be exactly the same, and in some cases it may be that the interview has what I like to call more realistic types of questions and so forth. So to give you a really simple template for how a lot of interviews work, they may be longer or have more things and so forth, but the bare minimum is usually now that there is some type of coding challenge to prove that you know what you're doing, or like to sort of showcase coding skills and so forth. And then there's usually a personal interview at the very least, where they get to talk to you and things like that, right? And in some cases they have a lot more stuff, and in some cases it might be that they don't give you a coding challenge because you passed the interview. Like there are flavors. But when it comes to the technical part, there's usually two types of challenges or interview questions or something like that. One is, and they can be on-prem, like you actually have to go to the company and do it there, or they can actually send you something like a link to a LeetCode platform style like Caddis or something that's very popular, at least in my part of the world, where you basically go there and you have some deadline for completing a set of questions, and then basically is LeetCode. Like it's you, because those platforms usually just focus on computer science and data structures and algorithms and things like that. And so in that situation it's literally the same. So if you and I usually give this tip to developers, that if you were to ask, if you bend my arm, and unless you're really trying to get into something like a FAANG company, I'm not sure if they still have it, but maybe it's the case that they do, where they're famous more or less for being very into the computer science questions and stuff like that. If you bend my arm, 80/20 I usually say. So 80% you should be spending on personal projects and trying to make sure that you learn the tools of the trade and the stack as we call it, and 20% on these sorts of questions. And the reason being because you can't really know if you're going to be in an interview where they have exactly these sorts of questions, or if you're going to get the other type, which is the one that I usually use, which is more realistic things where you get a small sample project or something similar, where let's say that my company works in a Java stack. As if you're a backend developer, okay, then I might give you a basic application like a Maven project or something like that, and then you will have some specification like implement endpoint A, B, and C, and make sure that like you write tests or something similar to that, and then you get to work with the tools that we use in that project usually, so that we can get a feel for that. All right, in this simple little application with these basic challenges, which as I said, it's usually nothing super complicated. The downside is, I'm very sorry to say, there are some companies who take this and just run with it. I've had coding challenges, guys, where like these styles of coding challenges, that's the big downside. If you do it wrong, your little tiny application can turn out to take a week or two for the candidate to complete. And I've had those where it literally takes a week of like at least many hours to implement everything, to write all the tests, and like so forth and so forth, even if it's a small application. And that sucks. It sucks bad. But that's also like that's the other type of thing that you can get, and that's why I say the 80/20 rule. And the reason why I say 80/20 and not 50/50 is because, well, you can, like, I mean, take it with a pinch of salt when I say these things, guys, but once you get into the company, then the sort of learning you've done for like working with the programming language, the main libraries associated with it, and learning how to use Git and version control and like all of this sort of stuff that you do first prepare for the types of challenges, as I was saying, that are more realistic. Like that's supposed to be the job. Like that is the job, and there's not that much overlap with LeetCode and like these sort of more computer sciencey algorithmic questions and the actual work. And so what I tell people is that the reason why you need to put at least some effort into it is, as I said, because it's a gateway type of thing where they might have that as a prerequisite. Like when you do the interview, they're going to ask you to do a computer science type of thing. And if you pass that, then you're basically, well, it's not as dramatic as all that, but you can basically forget everything you did, because that stuff is, there are absolutely situations where that is very useful information, but 99% of your work is going to be focused on, as I said, the more realistic stuff, knowing your tools, knowing how to set up a project, or create endpoints, or if it's a front-end thing like making like UI components and all that stuff, the computer science stuff, that's something that is very useful to have with you, because it's going to make you a better programmer to a certain degree, but it's not as important as knowing the tools of the trade. So what I want you to take away from this is that the difference between LeetCode types of stuff and like computer sciencey questions and actual interview questions is usually that there's two types. Usually you have the ones that are identical, where they literally send you a LeetCode challenge or something similar to that, and then you implement an algorithm, or they do a realistic test, which is a small application or something like that, where you get to work usually with the tools that they have within the company, because they want to simulate a coding challenge that is closer to home for them, the stack that they are using, or so forth. And apart from that, there's usually at least 2 steps in every interview, at least one, especially if you're a junior. Usually you have a coding challenge which you have to complete, and a personal interview, and those are almost always the same. And in many cases, or some cases really, you might have more steps and so forth, like everybody. That full disclosure, guys, at least I think that the way that we do interviews in like the programming world, it's really weird in many cases. Like some companies do like super long interviews. It feels like you're preparing for the fucking Olympics sometimes, I'm sorry to say. And some companies don't. Like it varies from every company, like exactly how they do it, but those two things are almost always there. And in the personal interview, the only thing that is going to matter usually is like that. Then it's usually not computer sciencey questions they're going to ask you. It's more personal questions, like what types of technologies have you been working with, what experience have you had, like personality types of things and personal experiences and stuff like that. And in those sort of situations, that's why I give you the tip 80-20, is because if you put 80% into your own personal projects and trying to learn your own stack and the tools that you are focusing on, that's usually more valuable. That's going to prepare you more for the actual work and for the personal interview in many cases than doing like just LeetCode challenges. Because the LeetCode challenges, although that is theoretically very useful, and as I said, it can be a prerequisite to even get the job, it is not a good reflection of what's actually going on in the actual workplace. And you can say what you want about why do we actually do those things and so forth. I can't tell you, because every company does it differently. I can give you pros and cons and stuff like that, but just accept that this is the way it works right now, and you can't really just change it. And if you want to make sure that you're prepared for any eventuality, you can't completely ignore it, just as you can't just ignore the other type. Like you can't focus on one here, guys. So try to keep a good eye on both a little bit. Focus more, as I said, on the actual tools on the stack, because that is the stuff that you're actually going to do in your 9 to 5 or like your daily job. Whereas the LeetCode stuff is, if you get it in just make sure that you know enough so that you can survive an interview which has those types of challenges, and then you're probably, I would say, you're pretty good. Have a great day.